The Idaho sun was a merciless hammer in the late summer of 1885. It beat down on the dry, cracked soil until the earth screamed for rain. The air was thick with the scent of bitter sagebrush and scorched pine needles. Mei Lin stood at the edge of her small ranch near the dusty outskirts of Boise. She was only 32 years old. In her reflection, she saw a woman far older than 32.
She was a widow in a land that hated her skin and her soul. Her husband, Chen, was gone. The Silver City mines had claimed him in a roar of collapsing rock a year ago. And before this summer ended, another stranger would change her life forever. For historical context, this story contains references to a mining accident. No graphic details are described. Now she was alone on the small ranch she and her husband had struggled to build.
She wore a traditional purple silk tunic. It was the last gift her husband had brought from San Francisco. She only wore it on difficult days. Today was one of those days. It was a fading relic from her lost life in Canton. The fabric reminded her of the life she had lost. Dust coated the embroidery. Sweat soaked the high collar. She clutched a pile of heavy cedar pickets against her chest. The previous night, a fierce windstorm had torn through the valley. The fence had collapsed like a house of cards. Without that wood, her 3 horses would vanish into the treacherous hills. She tried to lift a massive corner post. Her muscles burned with a white-hot fire. Her breath came in ragged, desperate gasps. The wood was gray, splintered, and heavy with the weight of time. She felt the sting of tears in her eyes. In the Idaho Territory of 1885, a woman alone was a target. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 had stripped her of her dignity in the eyes of the law. Many people believed she did not belong on this soil. Her neighbors looked at her with eyes of cold stone or sharp suspicion. But Mei Lin did not care about their cruel laws. She only cared about the horses. She only cared about the memory of the man who had built this cabin with his bare hands. The silence of the valley was suddenly broken. The slow, rhythmic thud of hoofbeats echoed against the canyon walls. Mei Lin straightened her spine. She hid her trembling, blistered hands behind her back. A lone rider appeared through the haze of heat. He sat tall on a sturdy buckskin horse. She recognized him instantly. His name was Silas Miller. The locals called him Gray. They called him that because of his hair, his beard, and his ghostly silence.
He was an old cowboy who had outlived his era. He was a remnant of the great cattle drives that had once defined the West. Years later, Mei Lin would remember this moment as the day everything changed, the day she met the man she would never forget. Silas pulled his horse to a halt 20 feet away. He tipped the brim of his sweat-stained Stetson.
His face was a rugged map of deep wrinkles and jagged scars. He did not speak. He simply looked at the fallen fence. He looked at the exhausted woman standing in the dirt. He saw her purple silk dress stained with orange Idaho clay. He saw the raw, bleeding blisters on her small palms.
Silas did not ask for permission. He dismounted with a heavy groan.
His joints creaked like the worn leather of his saddle. He walked to his pack and retrieved a heavy framing hammer. He grabbed a handful of iron nails from his saddlebag. Mei Lin watched him with a heart full of caution. In this world, kindness usually came with a hidden price. Trust was a luxury she had long ago buried in the dirt.
Silas knelt by the post and began to work. The sound of his hammer was a heartbeat in the silence. Clang, clang, clang. He did not rush the job. He moved with the steady, quiet confidence of a man who knew how to mend things. He did not just patch the hole, he reinforced every single inch of the perimeter. He dug a deeper hole for the main post. He used his remaining strength to ram the earth tight around the timber. Mei Lin stood there, completely mesmerized. His hands were enormous. They were stained with grease,
earth, and the toil of decades.
They were the hands that had carved a civilization out of the dust. As the sun began to dip behind the Owyhee Mountains, the fence stood solid. It was a barrier against the chaos of the wild. Silas wiped his forehead with a frayed blue bandana. He looked at the fence, and then he finally looked at her.
He saw her profound vulnerability. He saw the fear she fought so hard to hide behind her quiet, guarded face. Mei Lin stepped forward. She reached out and touched the sturdy, honest wood. She looked up into the eyes of the old cowboy.
The words escaped her lips before she could catch them. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. Her voice trembled. For a moment she stared at the fence. Then she looked at him.
"I thought I had to carry all of this alone." Mei Lin looked away. Then, almost too softly to hear, she added, "I need a man like you." The words hung in the evening air. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. The words surprised even her. It wasn't just about the fence. It was about the empty chair at her table, the silent cabin, the endless weight of surviving by herself. Silas understood exactly what she meant. Silas froze in place. No one had looked at him with such raw necessity in 20 years. He felt a warmth blooming in his chest that the sun could never provide. He did not offer a speech. He simply gave a slow, solemn nod. He knew exactly what she meant. He knew what it felt like to be a ghost in your own life. If this story touches your heart, take a moment to subscribe. Now, let us see how one act of grace transformed 2 lonely lives. Silas did not ride away that night. Mei Lin invited him into the small, dim cabin. She served him a humble meal of white rice and salted pork. To Silas, it tasted like a royal feast. They sat together in the golden glow of a kerosene lamp. The silence between them was not a wall. It was a bridge. It was peaceful. Silas began to talk, his voice like gravel and honey. He spoke of the horrors of the Civil War. He spoke of the endless, dusty trails of Texas. He spoke of the brothers he had buried in unmarked graves. He spoke of the gold he had chased but never found. Mei Lin told him of the lush green village in China she would never see again. She spoke of a husband who had treated her like a queen in a shack of mud. She began to cry as the memories surfaced. The tears fell like diamonds onto her purple silk dress. Silas reached across the rough wooden table. He did not grab her hand. He simply rested his calloused fingers near hers. It was a silent promise of presence. It was a vow that he would not vanish into the night. He slept in the small, cramped bunkhouse that evening. The next morning, he was awake long before the sun. Days turned into weeks. Silas never announced his arrival. He simply appeared whenever something needed fixing. A broken gate, a leaking roof, a stubborn horse. Somehow, he always knew. He chopped a cord of wood until the stack was high. He hauled cold water from the rushing creek. He climbed the roof and patched the leaks in the barn. But the world outside the ranch was not so kind. Word spread quickly through the saloons and shops of Boise. A Chinese widow and an old white cowboy living on the same land was a scandal. In 1885, the air was poisoned with hatred. The Rock Springs Massacre in Wyoming had just occurred. Dozens of Chinese miners had been murdered by mobs. That wave of violence was rolling toward Idaho. One sweltering afternoon, a group of local men rode toward the ranch. They were led by a wealthy rancher named Walter Kane. He wanted Mei Lin's land to expand his cattle empire. "You're a disgrace to your race, Gray," the rancher spat from his horse. "Living here with a foreigner, it's a sin." Silas stepped out onto the porch. He did not have a Winchester in his hand. He only held his heavy framing hammer. He stood tall, his gray beard catching the harsh light. "This woman is my neighbor," Silas said. His voice sounded like rolling thunder across the plains. "And she is under my protection." "You're outnumbered, old man," the rancher sneered. Silas looked the man directly in the eye.
"I've faced down charging bulls in winter blizzards," Silas said quietly. "A few cowards on horses don't scare me."
The men grumbled and looked at one another. They saw the cold, hard steel in the old man's gaze. They knew Silas Miller was a man who didn't know how to retreat. They turned their horses and rode away in a cloud of dust. But the tension remained, heavy and thick.
The hatred of the town only drove Silas and Mei Lin closer. They were two outcasts building a fortress of their own making. Winter arrived with a brutal vengeance. The snow piled high against the cabin walls. Inside, the fireplace roared with a life of its own. Mei Lin taught Silas the soft sounds of her native tongue. Silas taught her how to ride a horse like a true Western legend. One freezing December night, the wind howled like a dying ghost. The temperature dropped so low that the nails in the walls popped like pistols. Mei Lin sat by the hearth, shivering violently. Silas took his heavy, wool-lined coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. He sat on the floor beside her chair. Mei Lin reached down and touched his silver hair. "You stayed," she whispered into the dark. "I had nowhere else to go," Silas replied.
"But looking at you, I think I've finally arrived home." He looked up at her with eyes full of an ancient light. The age gap between them ceased to exist. The difference in their blood was forgotten.
They were simply two souls who had found a port in a lethal storm. Silas leaned up and gently kissed her forehead. It was a gesture of profound respect. It was the beginning of a love that didn't need a name. Mei Lin felt the hollow ache in her heart finally begin to close. She realized that true strength wasn't just about endurance. It was about the courage to stay when the entire world told you to run. As the years passed, the ranch began to flourish. Together, they planted an apple orchard in the stubborn soil. They bred horses known across the territory for their spirit. They were never legally married. The laws of 1880s Idaho made their union a crime. But in the eyes of the land and the sky, they were husband and wife. They faced many more trials together. The Great Fire of 1889 threatened to swallow their home in flames. They stood side by side with wet blankets, fighting the heat of hell. They saved the house, though the orchard was scorched to ash. Mei Lin did not cry this time. She simply grabbed her shovel and started again. She had a man like Silas by her side. And Silas finally had a reason to keep his heart beating. By the turn of the century, Silas was a very old man. His legendary strength began to flicker and fade. The hammer felt like a mountain in his hand. The roles slowly reversed. Mei Lin became the one who fixed the fences. She wore denim trousers now, practical and tough, but she kept her purple silk dress tucked away in a cedar chest. She nursed Silas through his final long illness in the winter of 1902. He died in the very bed they had shared for 17 beautiful years. His last words were a faint, rasping whisper. "Thank you for giving me a reason to stay." His voice was barely a whisper. Mei Lin buried him on the high hill overlooking the valley. She buried him right next to the fence he had repaired on that first day. She placed his heavy iron hammer on his grave. She stayed on that ranch for another 20 years. She became a legendary figure in the Idaho Territory, a woman of grace, of iron strength, and an unbreakable spirit. She never married again. She didn't need to. For 17 years, she had known a love strong enough to last the rest of her life. To Mei Lin, love had always looked like an old cowboy with a hammer and a heart made of gold.
This story reminds us that love is not always a fairy tale. Sometimes love is a repair job. Sometimes it is the simple choice to stay when the world wants you gone. It is about the dignity we find in one another's broken pieces. This story is a historically inspired work of fiction created for storytelling and entertainment.
Thank you for joining us on this journey through the Idaho frontier. If this story touched your soul, please leave a comment below. Tell us about the person who helped you mend the fences in your life. We cherish your stories of kindness and human resilience. Don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who needs hope.
In our next video, we will explore the secret life of a pioneer doctor, a man who risked everything to save a hidden village in the mountains. It is a tale of medicine, mystery, and a sacrifice that will leave you breathless. You won't want to miss it. Until next time, keep your heart open and your spirit strong. The frontier may be gone, but the love that built it lives on forever.